right, guys. Today I'm going to bring to you guys my top 10 books. There are so many books out there, obviously, in the world. And what do I like to read? Well, apparently, I like to read about emotional well-being. At least this year I did. And so you'll see that as a theme throughout the 10 books that I'm going to talk to you guys about tonight. And let me share my screen with you because let's just get right into it. There's so much to share. And we are going to, on the 26th of February, we're going to be meeting at my home. And so I'd love to invite you guys to meet here so we can actually talk about your favorite book. So what you're going to do is bring your favorite book to my house, and we're going to have a discussion over what it is that you've learned from that book. And it could be one of these 10. Okay, but I'd love it to be a book that you read within the last couple of years, and just bring your pearl of wisdom. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So my top five, well, I guess these aren't in any particular order, so don't think of it that way, but I should say Atomic Habits is probably up there as my number one or two, just because I love Atomic Habits. I read it so often. Actually, I've read it 4 times. So if you look at it just in terms of how many times I've read the books, that one would be up there. And then we're going to talk about Outlive by Peter Attia, Find Your People by Jenny Allen, Winning the War in Your Mind by Craig Groeschel, and Build the Life You Want. So let's talk about our first 5 books, and then we'll go into the last 5 in the second section. So Atomic Habits, gosh, if you come to my office, you'll see this book on display. So if you don't have this book by now, you should have it. I call it the Bible of Habit Change. And this is what's said on pages 20 through 28 that I think is just really sums up the reason for this book and why he thinks the way he thinks. And he says, if you're having trouble changing your habits, the problem isn't you. The problem is your system. So bad habits repeat themselves again and again, not because you don't want to change, but because you have the wrong system for change. You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. So this book, Atomic Habits, gets the name Atomic because it's referring to starting small or getting 1% better every day. He refers to that in the pages between 20 and 28. And he's also going to refer to this little sloping graph here, is that we have this law of latent potential. And so what we're looking for is results, obviously, on this vertical graph, and then the time it takes to get those results on the horizontal line. And oftentimes what we hope to happen is we get this linear progression of something changing, like weight loss, for example. We're hoping it happens linearly, but actually it takes a little bit of time for that airplane to take off the runway, and eventually it does, and then it takes off, right? And in the middle, this, you can't see what it says down here, but it says the Valley of Despair. This is where people really get upset and like they're just not achieving their goals fast enough, so they give up. But if you gave up here, you wouldn't get this opportunity to really see this big gain toward the end of the year. And it really does take a while for habits to take off. In fact, he says if you get better, 1% better every day at something, you'll be 37 times better at it by the end of the year. So I think that's worth it. It's obviously better than going down this way. Ooh, down results are like worse than when you started. So we don't want that. Yeah, so this is the plateau of latent potential. Latent potential just means it takes us a while to get there, but it's going to happen. In fact, I just had a client come to my office this week, and she's now lost 60 pounds of fat off of her body. And she, when we were talking about her latest in-body results, it wasn't like she was jumping for joy at it, because it had happened slowly and over maybe a little over a year to happen. And so, if you'd lost 60 pounds in a couple months, maybe you'd be a little bit more excited because it's all happening so quickly. But because it happens over a long period of time, we aren't celebrating those small wins along the way, but we need to. Right. And so I showed her the results of her first in-body compared to her last in-body, and she was like, wow, and then the excitement lit up. I was like, wow, look how far I've come. And so I think it's important we take some time to really celebrate the small wins that we have every single day. And I love Atomic Habits for just getting us right back on track and talking about so many other great things about habit change. So you guys have to read it. We're not going to spend a lot of time on any one of these books today, but obviously you know how important it is to me as a coach. And so I use a lot of his information in our coaching sessions. So if you read it, you'll recognize some of the things we're talking about. All right, book number 2 is Outlive by Peter Attia. And what I really took away from this book was how powerful exercise is as a potent longevity drug. In fact, he says, exercise is a habit you must adopt if you do nothing else, because 77% of the US population doesn't exercise. And going from 0 to 90 minutes per week decreases all-cause mortality by 14%. And so one of the ways we can measure that is aerobic fitness is measured as VO2 max, and it's the single most effective measure for longevity. Now, VO2 max is typically measured on a treadmill in a lab with a mask on your face and big tubes coming out, and they're measuring carbon dioxide and oxygen consumption. And VO2 max is a measure of how much oxygen you consume. Well, if you guys wear an Apple Watch and you have an Apple phone and you wear your Apple Watch for your exercises, you can actually look this up, what your VO2 max is, and compare it against this chart. So if you go to the health app on your phone, it's a little heart app. You just type in health if you're searching for it on your phone, and you go to the browse section and then type in heart. Okay, and then you go to the heart section, you can see what your VO2 max is there. I did this just the other day. I'm between the ages of 40 and 49, and my VO2 max is 31. So I have an average VO2 max, which doesn't surprise me because I do a lot of high intensity interval training, but I'm not doing like long distance cardiovascular marathon like training. And so I don't utilize as much oxygen for my exercises as you would think. But if I did training that was specifically like hiking or running, I probably would be more in this good category. So kind of something I might consider actually taking up longer, so sustained cardiovascular like activity in order to get this VO2 max to increase. All right, because he says it's the single most effective measure for longevity, this VO2 max is definitely worth getting measured. So if you guys need to pay a lab to do it, or go in and get some cardiovascular testing done, they'll probably test your VO2 max. I thought this was also interesting on page 221 of the book. He says, poor cardiovascular health carries a greater relative risk of death than smoking, according to some recent studies that were done. I'm like, okay, so that's where you've heard sedentariness is actually worse than smoking. And so another thing you can do is check how much inactivity you're having during the day and just try and beat your inactivity goal each day. Some people have the goal of walking 10,000 steps a day. Well, maybe your goal is beating your inactivity time. And I can track my inactivity time through my Aura ring, but there are probably other apps to do that as well. All right, let's read a few more statistics I thought were interesting. Crawling from the bottom of the VO2 max percentage of the bottom 25% to between 25% to 50% cuts your risk of death nearly in half. Muscle mass, on the other hand, so strength training, steeply declines after the age of 65, and then even more steeply after the age of 75. By the time you're 80 years old, the average person will have lost 16 pounds of muscle. People who exercise through those years lose on average 6 to 8 pounds of muscle, compared to people who don't exercise, they're losing that 16 pounds of muscle. So it's really important that through those years, when you're going from 65 to 80, that you're continuing to exercise regularly so you lose half the amount of muscle you would if you didn't, because muscle mass is going to be lost. But one of the other important things that you need to do is work on foot speed. So doing some jumping or hopscotch, jump rope, stuff like that will help increase foot speed so that you don't fall. It says don't be one-dimensional. So you need to have a good VO2 max, but you also need to have good strength, flexibility, balance, and stability. And do what's sustainable, do what you love. Okay, so find an activity you really like to do and try and hit all those areas. All right, the next book, Find Your People by Jenny Allen. So Jenny Allen's a Christian author. She's prolific in her writing. I've even heard her speak live a couple of times. She puts on the If Gathering once a year, which is coming up actually at the end of this month. So if you're interested in listening to Jenny Allen's If Gathering, it's well worth it. It's a full day of speakers and other authors who are going to be giving their words of wisdom. But this is a book she wrote a couple years ago. And Find Your People is just such an interesting look at, are we a society? I think we are a society of people who become more and more isolated, especially since COVID. And what we're finding with that is people are becoming more and more depressed. So loneliness is just a real big issue. It's interesting, a couple other books that I will be referring to later today actually address the same problem. So we know that it's an issue that multiple books are writing about it right now. We were not created to live alone. We have to have somebody in our lives that we would consider a close friend or a spouse that we can talk to and really feel safe around. In fact, she talks about this African village of women that long time ago they were cleaning their clothes together in a dirty river, and they would meet once a day to do that. And this is where they would get all their gossip, and they would laugh, and they would just share life together. And then as time went on, they were an agricultural village, so they were selling more of their food that they were raising and making more money, which then made them a little bit more independent, allowing them to build their own homes. And some of them got electricity and washers and dryers. And so they were no longer meeting around the dirty water hole to clean their laundry. And what they found, which is an interesting study, is that most of these women became really depressed and isolated. They were missing out on that need for each other. That deep sense of community is what we really do long for. If you feel like you really struggle with this and you don't have your people, this is a great book to help challenge you and teach you a little bit more about how to go about doing that. Here's some things to consider. This is straight from her book. This is a funnel to be thinking about. We have to start with a lot of acquaintances in order to actually find those 2 to 5 close friendships. So if you don't have close friends, it's important to get into an environment where you can meet a lot of acquaintances. So whether you have a workplace environment, a church group, or something of like interest, maybe it's your kids' soccer team, or you join a gym and you join a fitness class. Now all of a sudden, all those women in that fitness class are your acquaintances. Maybe you join a weight loss challenge with a bunch of other ladies, and now they become your acquaintances. But then because you have something in common that you're working toward, that becomes people who are really interconnected. They're your village. They become a place of constant support, commitment, and consistency in your life. And that village from there could be where you find your 2 to 5 closest friends. So just something to be thinking about. How do you find them? It can be difficult if you're an introvert. If you're an extrovert, one thing you need to be careful of is it's hard to create really close friendships, because extroverts like a lot of people, but they don't really create deeper connections with the people that they are around. Okay, but introverts tend to create deeper connections, but they just don't want to get out there. So anyways, you got to kind of know yourself and get outside of your comfort zone and go do it anyways. Some things we need to consider when we're looking for our people is, are they available? Is it somebody who's constantly like working like a workaholic? Are they available, like not available mentally? Even when we're with them and we're talking to them, they're just checked out. Or is the person just like always gloating about all the things they do? They're very prideful, narcissistic. That's a person who's not humble, probably somebody we don't want to really befriend, or they might be somebody who's like a negativity vampire. They're constantly negative. And so we don't feel like we can really connect with them. Or they're Miss Pollyanna, so everything is good in their life, and there's nothing about them that's transparent or vulnerable. So you're just sort of like, who is this person? They're not even real. So finding somebody who's available, humble, and transparent is the type of people you should be looking for. And that's all I'll say on that book. Okay, Winning the War in Your Mind by Craig Groeschel. I listened to this one on Audible. I don't have the book, but I felt like the biggest takeaway for me on this one was something I implemented into a speech that I was doing for a women's conference. It was called the God Box. And so what I decided to do here was I just basically put a box just like this one in front of every single woman at the conference. And I said, hey, okay, here's your box right in front of you. You're going to write down your problems. You're going to pray about them, and you're going to put them inside the box. So everyone had a sheet of paper, they wrote down their problems, stuck it in the box, and closed the lid. Now, the point of that was to just make sure the person knew that if they're putting it in the box, that means they're giving it back to God. They're saying, God, I give you full control over this situation in my life, and I'm willing to not take it back. I'm giving it all to you. And I'm going to just pray about it, but I'm not going to try and take back control over the situation. And I'm not going to ruminate on this or worry about it anymore. God, it's all being given to you. So by physically going to the box and putting it in there is just like a representation that it's out of your mind and you made a conscious decision to no longer ruminate on it. Now, let's say you go back to thinking about it again and worrying about it, and you want to do something about this problem, and you've already given it to God. So what you're going to have to do is open back up the box, take out the little piece of paper and say, God, I don't believe you have this. I'm going to take it back. And so just that conscious awareness of what you're doing takes it out of your subconscious brain into your conscious and says, wait, what am I doing? No, I know God has this. Okay, put it back, shut the lid and walk away and be just willing to pray about it. Now, I have a situation with our son who hasn't talked to us in a couple years, and this is exactly what I did. It was so freeing. I was like, okay, I'm not gonna worry about this anymore. So when I talk about it, I actually don't get emotional about it because I know God's got this. No matter what happens, I'm gonna be okay with it because God says, I have the situation in hand. You don't have to worry about it anymore. You don't have to think about it anymore. If you think about it, just remember that I have it. Okay. So it's just that there's so many great things about that book. He's a Christian author, Craig Rochelle. He's written many, many books, but that would be a great book if you're looking to do a book study with a bunch of women. I like that one a lot. And this was just the one idea I got from there, but there were many. All right, let's go on to Build the Life You Want. This is a book I'm reading currently. I kind of like a couple hours left in it on Audible, but I ended up going to Barnes and Noble and buying it because there's so many good things in here. Oh my gosh. I am eating up this book right now. Um, I don't know. I feel like it's just a culmination of everything I've learned this year in one small book. And so as we go through some of the other books we're going to talk about, I'm like, wow, this one really sums everything up in a easy way of thinking about it. So Arthur Brooks, I was listening to a YouTube of him, and I actually posted this YouTube video in our No Bad Days Inner Circle group and asked you guys to listen to it. And I can really like the guy and liked what he had to say. So I bought his book, and this is why it's on here. But this particular chapter on the power of metacognition really stood out to me because it's what I tell my clients all the time. And I've never used the word metacognition, but it's all about taking your subconscious emotional state and bringing it up to the conscious behavior of what it is that you're trying to do with that. So let's take, for instance, emotional eating. So somebody is bored, or they just had an issue with reading a negative text, or they were just rejected, or for some reason they're just emotionally charged right now, and so they go to food for that dopamine hit. Well, that's a subconscious operating system because there's a belief there that says, hey, when I'm under stress, this food is actually what's best for me, and it makes you feel better. And I don't discount that it makes you feel better, because a lot of things like hedonistic pleasures make us feel better when we do them, but doesn't mean they're good for us, like gambling or pornography or shopping sprees, spending money, those kind of things. Eating, gluttonous eating happens to be one of those hedonistic pleasures that helps us feel better. Unfortunately, it works too good. Alcohol does this too, and same with drug use, that kind of thing. But when we are thinking metacognitively, what happens is we look at the situation by thinking about it. We're no longer just subconsciously going to the pantry, opening it up and eating a lot of food. And then later on, we wake up and go, what did I just do? And then you feel guilty about it and shame. In this case, what you're doing is you're opening up the pantry, you're thinking about it, and now you've taken it out of the subconscious brain, and now you're consciously aware of separating your emotion from your behavior, which then allows you to control it. So then you still have the option to do it or not do it. But when you're consciously thinking about it and you're like, okay, I'm going to eat this anyways, well, maybe you eat a lot less of it because now you're consciously aware of that behavior. You haven't had to say no to eating that thing, but you are definitely more aware than when we subconsciously do things. So I like this idea of metacognition. It gets brought up in several of the books that I'll mention today, but He talks about it throughout this book in building the life you want. So the metacognition piece is kind of at the beginning of the book, so that all this kind of then interweaves throughout in helping you build a happier life. So I highly recommend Build the Life You Want and the Jenny Allen book, Find Your People, as a way, because they have the same concepts in there. He talks a lot about having friends. It's actually one really big chapter in here about when we don't have family, friends, faith, or purpose, then we struggle to find happiness. And so he talks in here a lot about how to find friends and the right friends too. So I thought that was really interesting, the correlation between those two books. All right, let's go on. In this book, number one, there's 4 things in metacognitive thinking that you can do. So I just wanted to tell you what those 4 were. So number one thing you could do is when you experience intense emotion, simply observe your feelings. Allow it to move from your limbic system to your prefrontal cortex. Say to yourself, I am not this ... which is I am not angry. I am not this person who is out of control. I am a person who's healthy and makes better choices. So what does he mean by limbic system to your prefrontal cortex? So in his book, he talks a lot about the anatomy of the brain and how the limbic system is our fight or flight system. The brain is like that old monkey brain that is where all the stress lives. And so when we are under stress and we're thinking limbically, we are in that subconscious operating system and we do things out of anger or stress or whatever emotion we're feeling. Well, taking that emotion and bringing it to the prefrontal cortex where we actually have to cognitively think about it means that we're observing our feelings from a place of cognition. Okay, number 2, he said journaling your emotions is one of the best ways to achieve metacognition. Make your list and be in charge of your day. Number 3, keep a database of positive memories. Interrupt the negative loop by conjuring up happier memories. Make a list of happy memories so you can go back and review. And number 4, look for meaning and learning in the hard parts of life. Reflect on the difficult experiences with the explicit goal of finding meaning. So I think these are all really great ways to get out of our limbic system into our prefrontal cortex. If you're a journaler, you're already doing the right thing. But I think it's important, like number 4, when we're looking at something that's hard, we have to look at where's the meaning in this? Is there something for me that I'm supposed to learn here? Asking yourself those questions helps you think metacognitively and not just go, well, the universe is set up to totally undermine me and constantly make me down in the place of a pit of despair and you're constantly thinking negatively. No, this is like, okay, what does this have for me? Find deeper meaning in it. All right, next book is Green Lights. And then we're going to talk about Good Boundaries and Goodbyes by Lisa TerKeurst, Dirty Genes by Dr. Ben Lynch, The Body Keeps a Score by Bessel A. Vanderkolk, and It Takes What It Takes by Trevor Mawad. So let's talk about Green Lights first. I love this book so much. Actually, I read this one right before Build the Life You Want, and I listened to it on Audible. I love Matthew McConaughey's voice, his Texas accent, and just the way he reads his own book just had me out loud laughing. And I did not realize how awesome this guy was. I'm like, he's an artist, of course, he's an actor, but the fact that he is a poet and total, like, I don't know, nomad, lived in an Airstream trailer for years, been married to the same woman for 15 years and didn't marry till much later in life because he wanted to meet the right person, has 3 kids with her. And it's just like, man, this guy's a good guy. I really like him. And this was at the beginning of the book, this quote, when he was in college at the University of Texas. He was going to be a lawyer, and he wanted to be a lawyer because he felt like that was the thing you do when you're like in college. You know, you're going to take care of the family, you're going to make a lot of money, and that's one way to do it. Well, he picked up this book that was on his frat guy's table one day, and he was about to go in to take this big test, and he didn't want to study for it anymore. So he picks up this book called The Greatest Salesman in the World. And in it, it said, I will form good habits and become their slave. And I really love that just because we talk a lot about habits in what we do here. And It's kind of true. Like, become a slave to your habits, your good habits, and things will ultimately get better for you. Well, he read the whole book like in a day. And after reading it, he decided that he needed to give up on his dream of being a lawyer and actually go after something he was really passionate about. And he decided to pursue acting instead. And he was so afraid to call his dad and tell him that. But his dad actually said, son, if you're going to do it, you need to be the best at it. And he was like just floored that his dad didn't yell at him for not wanting to be a lawyer. And it just to him gave him the green light. And so the book Green Lights is all about getting the green light to do something in life or making it happen. And this last quote down here, you're never too old to reinvent yourself, is something I tell everybody. I'm like, yeah, you can do whatever you want. You're never too old to reinvent yourself. If you want the green light, here it is. Like, where are you putting up the red lights in your life or yellow lights? And if you are, can we help you move past those to green light? And so this book was kind of encouraging. And if you're looking for encouragement and laughter and just kind of a lighter book, memoir of his life, then you'll love this book. And these are just some pictures from it. He actually has, like it says, some people look for an excuse to do, others look for an excuse not to. That is a bumper sticker. It has tons of bumper sticker quotes throughout the book. Actually, until I got the book, it was funny how he reads the book with all these little quotes and stickers all over the place. It was kind of hard to follow just listening to it, but getting the book to see all the pictures and all of his bumper stickers, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it now. Anyways, I was at Barnes and Noble to buy this book. And he's like, oh, this book is usually out of stock. It's super popular. And I was kind of surprised by that. Like, I guess I shouldn't have been, because when I was on Audible, gonna buy it on Audible, it had, I think, 5 stars out of 5 and 17,000 reviews. And I'm like, oh, this is a really popular book. And it just has, for the last year or two, been popping up in my feed on Audible as something I'd be interested in. And I've always just been like, no, why would I read a book from an actor? Like, who does he have to offer? Like, oh gosh, so much. Anyways, you guys will really enjoy this book. All right, let's talk about good boundaries and goodbyes. So Lisa TerKeurst, she's another Christian author. Oh boy, this lady, she's been through the ringer over the last couple years with a husband who I think he cheated on her, but also he just has been very addicted to alcohol and drugs and just hasn't been able to stop. And they have had to go through a divorce, and just her experience with all that. She has a couple other books on the story, but this one is in conjunction with her therapist. So her and her therapist wrote this book, and I really like that back and forth dialogue between the two of them, because she'll talk about her experience and then the therapist will talk about it from the perspective of therapy and the definitions of things. And so I really thought it was a good back and forth. Well, I'm going to kind of explain, I think it was around the middle of the book, some of the things they talk about around boundaries. Boundaries aren't going to fix the other person, but they are going to help you stay fixed on what is good, what is acceptable, and what you need to stay healthy and safe. And I can say, for my own reason why I read this was just the same issues we were having with our son. Just when we set boundaries that he needed to move out and move on with his life. He's 22 years old at the time we had that conversation, with money in the bank. You're like, all right, it's time for you to do this. And he moves out, and then we don't talk to him for a long time. And, he's got a lot of trauma from his childhood. He grew up with abusive family. We got him when he was 16 and adopted him when he was 18. So needless to say, there was a lot of trauma to work through, but we were always really good about setting boundaries with him. And it worked while he lived with us. But when he didn't, it no longer worked. And well, because of a lot of issues, but the boundaries we set were good for us. And that wasn't what was, good for him necessarily, or what he would have thought was good for him. But it definitely helped us be able to be okay with our marriage and the decisions we made moving forward. This book really helped me with that. Here's some good boundaries you can be setting on the left-hand side. My focus is on what I do. So good boundaries are focused on what you do. Your motivation is self-control. The mindset is I am responsible for my actions. So you can manage your own behavior. You own the actions you choose. The approach is you focus on your self-care, safety, sanity, and other things in your life that you can control. And the outcome is that I accept that I am powerless to control other people. Instead, I use my energy to limit my interactions with difficult people. Bad boundaries is the focus is on what the other person does. So the motivation is controlling or punishing the other person to get what I need. The mindset is I want them to do something different from what they are doing. So I have to change their behavior, or I own the actions they choose. So yeah, we don't own the actions other people choose. And we can't change other people's behavior, but we can own our own behavior and our own self-control over the things that we're doing to keep them from hurting us. The approach is that you're hyper-focused on the other person while constantly trying to motivate them, sometimes manipulating them to do what I feel is right. And the outcome is a frustrating cycle of me trying to manage unmanageable dysfunctions until I'm completely burned out, unhealthy, and bitter. Relationships are no longer a source of satisfaction and fulfillment, but instead a constant drain on my always frazzled emotions. So if you're not good at setting boundaries, it's really hard to create good friendships, healthy friendships. So going back to find your people, if you are somebody who hasn't created good boundaries in the past, it may be something you need to work on before you go out and find your people. Because if those people end up being people that are the energy vampires, the negativity people, you might find yourself in a bad boundary situation. And instead, you need to work on setting those good boundaries and focus on healthy relationships first. All right, let's go to Dirty Jeans off of the emotional books. Let's talk a little bit about our genes and how they affect us. I love this book. And in fact, on February 26th, when you guys come out to the house, we're going to talk more about this book. I have an idea for doing a challenge after our March 5th challenge is over with the Dirty Genes. And he has a diet in here called the Soak and Scrub. And it's a 2-week leading into, well, it's basically a 1-month challenge. And so of eating a certain way. So I'm thinking we're going to do that together if you're up for it, but a way to really clean out the systems, the detox systems, the methylation cycles, that kind of stuff. And so I love this book, how it just really breaks down and to an elementary level, our ability to understand genes and how they affect us. This little quote here: every moment of every day, our genes are giving instruction to our body. They regulate mood, metabolism, personality. Basically, everything you want to improve can be improved by better methylation. And what is methylation? Methylation is part of a cycle that our cells go through that actually helps us absorb certain nutrients into the cell. And we need to be able to keep that clean. There's ways to dirty the methylation cycle, and then there's ways to clean it up. So you can see the tail of these two mice here. One is obese and the other is not. The one that is not obese has a healthier mindset as well, however they test that. And so the difference between the two, they're identical twins. And the one that is obese has poor methylation, and the one that is of normal size has good methylation. So that's the tail of those two mice, but that's also the tail of a lot of us, right? So poor methylation can really affect so many different things. So I wanted to just list out here: proper methylation helps us with genetic expression, the conversion of food to energy, cellular protection, brain and muscle health, the production and balancing of neurotransmitters, stress and relaxation response, detoxification. So if we lack glutathione, because our methylation cycle is sticky, then we're not very good at detoxifying. Our immune response can be hampered. Our cardio function and DNA repair are all things that are hampered by poor methylation. So in the soak and scrub and the diet and like the 4-week challenge we might do, we're going to look at how we can unstick our methylation cycles and really get cleaner genes so that we can feel a lot better. And in this book, he talks about 7 SNPs. SNPs are single nucleotide polymorphisms. These are things that our parents gave us. So if you have homozygous SNPs, that means both parents gave it to you. If you have heterozygous, one parent gave it to you. But the people who are homozygous who have both copies of any of these 7 genes are actually at a much higher risk of poor methylation and a sticky genes, really dirty genes. So either you were born that way, in this case, your parents gave it to you, or you can make your genes dirty by the way you live. And so I want to talk more about that at our next meeting, and then kind of go more into the gene expression and how that works. All right, let's talk about another book. The Body Keeps the Score. Gosh, this book I read, I don't know, about 9 months ago, and it's really thick. It's a big book. So it has a lot to talk about with regards to trauma. Man, but it's good. Like, if you guys know anyone with trauma, or you have trauma in your past, your PTSD or whatever you might be going through mentally that just you're stuck in, this book is an amazing book. It talks about the anatomy of trauma and the PTSD brain and how we consolidate memory when we're under stress or don't. So a lot of anatomy and physiology background on that, but then he talks about how to help yourself. So the whole desperate times call for desperate measures, a summary on page 280 to 281. I just wanted to read that to you because I just felt like it kind of summed up some great things in his book. And then he goes through in his book and talks a lot about the ways we can help ourselves without medication. Now, don't get me wrong, he does use medication to treat his clients if needed, but he does talk about a lot of ways that he uses these different types of therapies, which I'll talk about in the next slide. Okay, bear with me while I read this to you, this page and a half. Desperate times require desperate measures. We all know what happens when we feel humiliated. We put all our energy into protecting ourselves, developing whatever survival strategies we can. We may repress our feelings. We get furious and plot revenge. We may decide to become so powerful and successful that nobody can ever hurt us again. And many behaviors are classified as psychiatric problems, including some obsessions, compulsions, and panic attacks, as well as self-destructive behaviors, starting out as strategies for self-protection. These adaptations to trauma can so interfere with the capacity to function that healthcare providers and patients themselves often believe that full recovery is beyond reach. Viewing these symptoms as permanent disabilities narrow the focus of treatment to finding the proper drug regimen, which can lead to lifelong dependence, as though trauma survivors were like kidney patients on dialysis. It's much more productive to see aggression or depression, arrogance or passivity as learned behaviors. Somewhere along the line, the patient came to believe that he or she could survive only if he or she was tough, invisible, or absent, or that it was safer to give up. Like traumatic memories that keep intruding until they are laid to rest, traumatic adaptations continue until the human organism feels safe and integrates all the parts of itself that are stuck in fighting or warding off trauma. Even trauma survivors I've met is resilient in his or her own way. Every one of their stories inspires awe at how people cope. Knowing how much energy the sheer act of survival requires keeps me from being surprised at the price they often pay, the absence of a loving relationship with their own bodies, minds, and souls. Coping takes its toll. For many children, it is safer to hate themselves than to risk their relationship with their caregivers by expressing anger or by running away. As a result, abused children are likely to grow up believing that they are fundamentally unlovable. That was the only way their young minds could explain why they were treated so badly. They survive by denying, ignoring, or splitting off large chunks of reality. They forget the abuse, they suppress their rage or despair, they numb their physical sensations. If you were abused as a child, you are likely to have childlike parts living inside you that is frozen in time, still holding fast to this kind of self-loathing and denial. Many adults who survive terrible experiences are caught in the same trap. Pushing away intense feelings can be highly adaptive in the short run, but it may help you preserve your dignity and independence. It may help you maintain focus on critical tasks like saving a comrade, taking care of your kids, or rebuilding your house. The problems come later. After seeing a friend blown up, a soldier may return to civilian life and try to put the experiences out of his mind. A protected part of him knows how to be competent at his job and how to get along with colleagues, but he may habitually erupt in rage at his girlfriend or become numb and frozen when the pleasures of surrendering to her touch makes him feel he is losing control. He probably will not be aware of his mind automatically associates passive surrender with the paralysis he felt when his friend was killed. So another protective part steps in to create a diversion. He gets angry and having no idea what sets him off, he thinks he's mad about something his girlfriend did. Of course, if he keeps blowing up at her and subsequent girlfriends, he'll become more and more isolated. But he may never realize that a traumatized part is triggered by passivity and that another part, an angry manager, is stepping in to protect that vulnerable part. Helping these parts to give up their extreme beliefs is how therapy can help people's lives or save people's lives. So, as we saw in chapter 13, a central task for recovery from trauma is to learn to live with the memories of the past without being overwhelmed by them in the present. But most survivors, including those who are functioning well, even brilliantly in some aspects of their lives, face another even greater challenge, reconfiguring a brain/mind system that was constructed to cope with the worst. Just as we need to revisit traumatic memories in order to integrate them, we need to revisit the parts of ourselves that develop the defensive habits that help us to survive. So that's just 1.5 pages of this entire book. So it is meaty. There's so much here, but I love how he talks about treatment strategies beyond medication. And this is throughout the book. And he talks about EMDR, which is therapy for rewriting the subconscious memories of the brain. If you've ever been through something where the memory just continues to trigger you over and over again, EMDR can be really helpful. He talks about yoga being a practice that can help your body get into a place of healing just by utilizing your body and exercise. And specifically, yoga has a lot of backed science behind it for the trauma brain. Neurofeedback. I actually looked this up. We have quite a few neurofeedback companies in Spokane to help rewire some of those subconscious thoughts. Equine therapy, so work with horses. He says working in the theater and improv can actually help people tap into their more creative brain, and tapping into your more creative, fun side of your brain actually gets you out of fight or flight and stop thinking about what's bothering you so much. Cognitive behavioral therapy actually hasn't been found to help much with PTSD, but it can help people who are in depression or people who have problems with like phobias. Breathing, chanting, movement therapy, all these things are great for decreasing our fight or flight part of our nervous system. And building safe relationships, community bonds. Again, there it is. Those friendships, those communities, those are so important. If we're living in isolation and we're not out there creating relationships or calling up friends that we once relied on for help, we're going to isolate even more, and that becomes something that's not good, because coping mechanisms could be all those hedonistic pleasures like we talked about earlier. Finding the right therapist is very important, that you really relate to the person, you like them, that they have the right type of strategy for you. And then touch therapy. So starting with massage therapy, maybe moving up into some other forms of touch therapy that have been shown to be very helpful. So I highly recommend The Body Keeps the Score for learning about anyone in your life that's been through trauma. It really helped me understand my son's brain a lot better and why he is doing what he's doing. The self-sabotage, the reason why he hasn't been coming around, the fact that he feels unlovable, and all the abuse he sustained when he was a little boy, and how he basically believes he's worthless. Even though we never told him that, he's one of those things you can never tell somebody there's something, and if they don't believe it, then they'll continue to do self-sabotaging behaviors to prove themselves right, or believe what their belief is in their subconscious operating system. So without him getting any kind of trauma therapy, there really isn't a way for him to heal unless a miracle happens. So praying for that. That's why it's in my God box. All right. It Takes What It Takes. This is the last book by Trevor Mawad. And I really enjoyed this because I watched this video, and I'm going to show you guys a clip from it in a little bit. But this YouTube video was what spurred us to want to read the book. My husband and I both really liked what Trevor had to say about neutral thinking. And he talks about how negative thinking is so bad for us, which you'll hear about in the video. But positive thinking is sometimes not an option. Like Who wants to think positively when their mother dies? Or who wants to think positively if they just lost their job or just got in a car accident? There's times when positive thinking just isn't an option. And it sounds like such a cliche when somebody says, oh, just think positively. It's like, go screw you yourself. You're like, I don't want to think positively about this. But we're also like, he'll tell you how important it is to not verbalize your negative thinking. Thinking about something negatively is one thing, but to verbalize the negative thinking can have a 10x effect. And so I thought that was really interesting. But to get to a place of neutral thinking, where we're not on one pendulum or the other. We're not negative, we're not positive about it. We're just thinking about a solution. And again, this goes back to metacognitive thinking. It's like we're getting out of our limbic system and getting into the prefrontal cortex where we actually think about what's a good solution. How can I move forward here? How can I get help? What situation am I in right now that I need to, if I think neutrally, then maybe I can actually get somewhere with this rather than complaining about it or having that Pollyanna attitude. So I want to share with you guys this YouTube video.
Well, we started to look at the externalization. Well, if somebody says something out loud, it's 10 times more powerful than if they think it. And then as we started to study the data, particularly data that was just reinforced by Christine Porath from Georgetown and Harvard, that negativity is a multiple of 4 to 7 times more powerful than positivity. So think about that. If I say something out loud, it's 10x. If it's negative, it's 4 to 7 times more powerful. So when I say negative things out loud, it's 40 to 70 times more likely that that will happen or cause a result that won't be good for me than if I just didn't say anything. So as we were going into our second year at Alabama, we were going into our first year at Florida State, and we were ultimately going into our second year at the University of Georgia, we made a bet. What if we could just get our players to not say stupid things out loud? What if we could just do that? Not teach any element of positive thinking, but eliminate conversations about the heat, complaining about coaches, complaining about circumstances, complaining about situations, verbalizing negativity. But we weren't going to lie to them and say, hey, be positive. We just taught them the data. And then what we did was some of the things that you noticed in the book, the stories in and around negativity are incredible.
Tell us some. Bill Buckner was one that took my breath away.
So Billy Buckner, who just passed away recently, was an incredible 8-time Gold Glove, a great baseball player for the Boston Red Sox. Where he made a mistake in sports that would be one of the biggest sport bloopers in history. And in 1986, he let the game-winning run score on a ground ball through his legs that ultimately would give the Mets the World Series.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was just watching an ESPN E60 Jeremy Schaap story, and I saw an interview that was done in 1990 that resurfaced in 1995, where Buckner was interviewed 12 days before the World Series. And he said, the dreams are to win the World Series. And the nightmare would be for me to let the game-winning run score on a ground ball through my legs. And then ultimately that's exactly what would happen. Now, by saying that out loud, what did he do? He didn't make it happen, but he increased the probability. And this is what I want people to understand. Your internal thoughts are all over the place.
I want to push on that.
Yeah.
Do you think that he makes it more likely because it's going to subtly influence his behavior, or because you're talking to some magical deity that then says, well, you said it, and so I'm going to make it happen?
I think that what he did is a subconscious plant. By verbalizing it and knowing that it's 10 times more powerful, he's planting it in the subconscious. He doesn't want it to happen, but it becomes something that's ultimately on his mind, and he gave it more power by verbalizing it.
And then wasn't there somebody that said, oh, I worry that I'm going to retire and die at 40 of a heart attack?
Right. So Pistol Pete Maravich, a basketball player, I'll give you 2 other examples, but he was interviewed at 26 years old. And he said, I don't want to play 10 years of pro basketball and die at the age of 40 of a heart attack. Well, he played 10 years of pro basketball and in Pasadena, California, died of a heart attack at 40. There's another great story that I saw from a magazine called Success Unlimited in 1973. A guy is hired to fix a refrigerated boxcar in back of a train. He goes into the train, he panics, gets himself locked inside the boxcar. So now he's pounding on the door, there's nothing to do. He starts to panic and thinks he's going to freeze to death. He finds a pen, he starts writing down, Tom, what's going through his mind, and he writes down, I'm becoming colder. As people, one of the things we do to ourselves is observe and report. I'm not playing well. I'm having a bad day. We're having a bad quarter. My marriage isn't going well. We observe and report. Still colder now, he writes, nothing to do but wait. Half asleep, I can hardly write. Finally, he says, these may be my last words. And I'll show you the article. They open up the boxcar many hours later and they find him and he's dead. But the temperature inside the boxcar was 56 degrees. The freezing apparatus was broken. There was plenty of air in the boxcar. There was no physical reason for his death. The best they could say is somehow he talked himself into dying. And as you know, the book covers the psychogenic death in and around the Korean War. When the Korean War, 1/3 of all American POWs died. And they said that one of the things that was done in the POW camps was the negativity. They manufactured articles about the United States being bombed. They withheld all positivity. They didn't give them any mail. Believe it or not, there are like regulations for POW camps throughout the world. And ultimately, they filled up these healthy American soldiers with all this doubt. A priest would end up calling it give up itis, and healthy American soldiers over a period of days would walk over to a corner, sit down, and die of broken hearts. So negativity is the most powerful thing we're combating. Look at our politics today. A positive message versus a negative message. It's no chance.
Have you ever read Man's Search for Meaning?
I haven't read that. Tell
Oh
me
gosh,
about
you're
that.
gonna love it. So Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl's in a
Oh, yes,
concentration
yes,
camp.
yes, yes.
It's actually in multiple, if I remember right, he was in 5 different concentration camps.
Yes.
And ultimately, he says that you could tell within 72 hours when someone was gonna die because they would give up.
Yep.
And he said once they gave up, then it was a 72-hour clock. They no longer knew why they were fighting and they would just die.
Right.
And he was like, but the people that kept a mental image of what they were suffering for, like what it was they
Right.
were going to do once they got out for their family, for whatever, he said that they would push through. And it just, I mean, look, there's obviously 1,000,001 reasons to die in a concentration camp.
Right.
But the fact that even in the concentration camp, they could go, 72 hours, we can peg it
Right.
because we've seen that person give up.
Right.
Like,
All right, we're gonna stop it there. I know you guys want to watch that whole video now. So I'll link it in our group just as something that's like it's good. I've watched it multiple times. My husband Adam has shown it to his football players. We, just think that what they talk about negative thinking is so important that we don't do it, especially not speaking it out loud. And then in Arthur C. Brooks's book, The Build the Life You Want, he talks about Viktor Frankl in there as well in the concentration camps. But he said just as much as the ones that were negative had died, the ones that were the most positive thinking actually also died at an alarming rate because they would think that, okay, the war is going to end by Christmas. And when the war wouldn't end by Christmas, they ended up feeling very defeated by what they had thought, the positive thinking. So then like, okay, now it'll be Easter. We're gonna get out of here. And then Easter would come and go and they'd still be there. So I guess that just kind of cements the idea of being more neutral about it and saying, what do I have to fight for? Not about we're gonna be out of here at a certain date or whatever. I don't know, just another way to kind of look at all these books and the interlinking of what they're all saying. But I think that's the reason why, you guys write a motivation statement at the beginning of working with me. You guys need to know your why. That even in the hard times, you have spoken out loud to me the reason why you're here, what's motivating you to continue, so that you continue to move forward thinking that it is possible. And that the small little wins along the way, like the atomic habits, are making it so that you find evidence to that fact, right? So you guys are doing an amazing job, and I'm so excited that you are working with me, and each and every one of you is so special to me in a lot of ways. And so please bring your book. It is something we can talk about on February 26th. I'm excited to have a full group here at the house and for all of us to just get to know each other a little bit better and have that community of people all working toward the same cause. And so that's what it's all about, you guys. We need community. So make sure you make it happen. Don't make other plans. 6:30 to about 8:30 on Monday night, the 26th of February. I'll see you guys there. Bye.